Welcome, everybody. Let's give everybody else a minute or so to join, and then we'll kick off this event. All right. I like to invite Robin Treen from the San Jose Museum of Art to officially kick off this event.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Priya. My name is Robin Treen, and I work for the San Jose Museum of Art. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. And welcome to another edition of Third Thursdays. And we are so pleased to be working with Mosaic again, especially in celebration of Women's History Month, which has now sort of become a tradition, hasn't it?
Yes.
One we hope will continue. Again, my name is Robin Treen. I'm from the San Jose Museum of Art. I'm the Special Projects Coordinator, and we are delighted to have, again, another iteration of Third Thursdays. Just a few little announcements from the museum. The museum has reopened, at least somewhat, after the pandemic, after the last crazy 2 years. We are open now Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 11 to 6. We hope that you will come down to the museum and actually visit us in person. We have 3 great exhibitions. You have 2 more weeks to see Break and Bleed, a show drawn from our permanent collection. And also in the downstairs gallery, we have a fabulous video installation called Factory of the Sun by German artist Tito Stirl. And it is an immersive video experience that deals with a lot of very suddenly very contemporary prescient issues, such as surveillance, modern warfare, corporate control of things, media, banking, all those sorts of issues. So it's a very timely and interesting topic. And then in the upstairs gallery, we have what I think is one of the most fabulous exhibitions we've ever had. And it's called Our Whole Unruly Selves. And it actually relates really interestingly to tonight's topics, because it is a very different take. It's sort of pushing figurative art into very contemporary times and very contemporary territory. By taking a leaf out of the book of philosopher and poet Fred Moten, who admonished us all to resist the temptation to allow ourselves to be flattened into one identity. This exhibition really looks at the fact that we are, even though we live in one body, we are many, many things, and they are uncontainable and irrepressible, and not something that falls easily into one label or one identity. And so the show really looks at that idea of flattening yourself into one thing. And I think it's a really wonderful thing. We have a couple of wonderful commissions in conjunction with that, including one piece that works with accessibility, worked with an artist to deal with accessibility for low vision people in a very creative way. And a series with San Jose Jazz as well, because jazz is so visceral. So it's a wonderful exhibition, and will be up, I think, through June. So I hope everybody will come down and see that. So let's see. I think that's the end of my announcements. Oh, except that I want to wish everybody happy St. Patrick's Day. And I hope you have on a little bit of green so the wee folk don't get after you. But you don't want that, trust me. I was raised on stories about what was going to happen to me if the wee folk got a hold of me. It was not going to be pretty. So you don't want to go there. Anyway, so with that, I will introduce Priya Das from Mosaic. And thanks again, Priya, for another wonderful program. And pass it off to you.
Absolutely, Robin. Thanks so much. For those of you who know us, you know that San Jose Museum of Art and its people are our second home, or maybe even the first home in San Jose, and they are our family. So thank you, Robin, for letting us curate this program for you again. And like you said, I hope so. I hope too that this is an ongoing tradition. So as some of you may know, Mosaic America operates at the intersection of history, identity, and culture, using the arts to bring people together. A culture-forward approach to creating a social contract between all of us, if you may. We use artistic and intellectual expressions to explore how our place, in all senses of the word, was created. We want to understand how our environment molded us, sure, but more importantly, we want to put forward programming that explores how we individually and collectively can mold our environment back with a forward approach. In other words, what is the change that we seek and how can we pursue it and practice it? So joining us with their own stories in the pursuit of place in history by defying, correcting, and claiming their own places to be the change in society are 6 extraordinary women, and you will get to meet them in 10-minute interludes through the course of this program, and then we will all get together again for a discussion and Q&A. You do see them on the screen here. We will start off with 2 authors, Wendy Rouse and Batiste Adkins, to be followed by Dorothy, Wendy, the Reverend Kathy Rowe, and Alice and Christine from the San Jose Women's Club. So join us on this journey as we explore the mosaic of American cultures. Wendy, I would like to begin with you. And if I might have, if I may politely ask the other guests to go off video, because I'll have you back on at a later time. Wendy, you have said that women have been taught to be quiet and take up less space. So their history has often been silenced as well. And I know that you have some slides for us. So I would say, let's get started.
Okay, great. Let me show the slides. All right, thank you all. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Wendy Rouse, and I teach history at San Jose State University. And I'm super excited to be here, especially to celebrate Women's History Month. But also, because my research focuses on women's history, I'm just excited to be able to share some of my research with you. Specifically, I studied the suffrage movement and the fight for the vote. So a few years back now, I wrote a book on the emergence of the women's self-defense movement, which you see on the left side of the screen here. And the book is titled Her Own Hero. So I was inspired to write this book because I had trained in martial arts my whole life growing up as a kid, and I was a self-defense instructor. I teach women's self-defense, and I was a historian too. And you would think this would have actually been the first book that I wrote, but it wasn't, because I actually thought that the history of women studying martial arts didn't go that far back in time, right? I thought it was more of a modern thing associated with the women's rights movement of the 60s and 70s. But when I was doing research for another project, I came across the image that is now the cover of the book of a woman in the early 20th century, and she's using a palm heel strike on an attacker on the street. And I was fascinated by this image, and I really, really wanted to know more. So I clipped the newspaper article. It was from 1904, and I started doing research on the topic. And what I found is that there have been a series of waves of the women's self-defense movement that correlate with the waves of the women's rights movement. And I found that in the early 20th century, when women were fighting for the right to vote, this is when we see the first wave of the women's self-defense movement. So women were fighting for the vote, but they're also fighting for the right to exist, right, in the public world and in the political world. So I found images like this one, and I found classes catered toward women to try to encourage them to learn to protect and defend themselves. And the reason for this is because as more and more women were working in the cities, they were increasingly experiencing backlash in the form of sexual harassment, assault, right, on the streets, in their workplaces, in their homes. And so women began to fight back by studying boxing and jujitsu for self-defense. Women also recognized, right, that there's almost this physical and political empowerment that kind of go together. They go hand in hand. And so what we see is that women are starting to realize that they needed to be able to defend themselves, because they had always been taught to look to men as the, quote, natural protector. And they had been taught that they should look to their husbands, their boyfriends, their brothers, their fathers to protect them. But what they learned is that the so-called natural protector wasn't necessarily going to protect them, and that in some cases it was the person that they were taught to look to for protection that ended up perpetuating harm against them. So a good example of this is suffragists in the fight for the vote themselves found that the police who were supposed to protect them actually were the ones committing assault against them. And so, for example, we have images like this one, the suffragettes in Britain, who were physically assaulted by the police for demonstrating for the right to vote. And they were literally kicked and punched, and jujitsu was used against them on the streets of London. So in response, they began studying jujitsu themselves, and they actually had special classes held in secret to train the suffragists. And they trained an elite group of women that they called the bodyguard to protect some of the leaders of the suffrage movement from harassment, not only from the police, but from anti-suffragists on the street. So as you can see, in the early 20th century, they really realized that there's this association between the political and the physical empowerment through the study of self-defense. So that was my first book. Now, more recently, kind of as an aside to this project, I started to be curious about the suffrage movement itself and some of the relationships that I noticed had formed in the suffrage movement. So my most recent book is actually due out this May. I'm super excited about it. And this book is on the queer history of the suffrage movement. So with the 100th anniversary, there was a lot of interest in the suffrage movement. The centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment happened in 2020, and scholars were really diving into the history that we thought we knew about the suffrage movement and challenging that traditional story, that story that tended to ignore the important role of Black women, Indigenous women, working class women, immigrant women, women of color in the fight for the vote. So in this book, I argued that that's very important, and so is challenging the heteronormative framing of the suffrage movement, because this tended to ignore the important role of queer women in the fight for the vote. So if you take a look at the book, what you'll find is, as you read through it, you'll start to understand why we don't know much about the queer history of the suffrage movement, how that was erased. And you're also going to discover some unearthed stories about important women in the movement. And if they were alive today, many of these women might identify as part of the LGBTQIA community. But those stories haven't been told. So in this book, I talk about how these stories deserve to be told, and not only because they contributed importantly to the suffrage movement, but because they challenged the gender and the sexual norms of their era. So that's a little bit about my work and my research, and hopefully we can talk about it more in the group discussion.
That was wonderful, Wendy. Thank you so much. And for those who aren't paying attention to chat, we have posted Wendy's entire bio in the chat, and we are welcoming of questions all through this event. I will kind of moderate your questions and ask them of the relevant people or all of us at various points through this program. I'd like to now welcome Jan Batiste Adkins to come on video. Hey, Jan.
For some reason, the video. Oh, the host has stopped the video, so you have to open that for me.
Sure. Hey, Gladys.
Okay. Start my video. There I am. Okay.
So Jan, welcome to the program. You said something in one of your interviews where you said, our history, and not just African history, but history of all people, is not documented and recorded. And we are not teaching our children about the actual groups of people that help to form the cities and the counties and the state. And I was struck by that comment, because that is indeed what we are all discovering, especially in the last 2 years, and all of the goings on has kind of revealed to us that what we know of history may not actually be history. So I'd love for you to kind of expand on your own work and research and kind of educate us on all of the above.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, I am, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to share my screen for my slides, and for some reason, oh, they're there.
That's okay.
Okay.
We've all been there, done that a few times now.
Okay, well, I'm going to share. Let's see what happens. Okay, there. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So I have to tell you what motivated me, because I think that, hold on just a quick second. Yeah, this is, okay, where are we? Oh, sorry. Okay, so what motivated me to begin researching the African American community began with my students. Oh, my cursor, where are you? Okay. Sorry. Oh, gee. For some reason this, okay, let me go back. So what really motivated me was my students. And I was, at that time, I was teaching high school English, and my students began asking me questions. And the questions that my students would often ask when reading John Steinbeck or any books about California, literature about and where California was the setting, my students would ask, well, what were Black people doing during that time? and I never had an answer. I was, you know, I thought, well, wait a minute. But as a teacher, you know, you can't tell students, I don't know. So what I did was I started doing research. I was working on a master's degree at San Jose State and in comparative literature. And I thought, okay, we're going to find out, you know, what was the Black community like? What kind of literature was produced by the Black community during the 19th and 20th centuries, during the turn of the 17th, well, the 18th and 19th, but didn't find much in the 18th, but I did find a lot of interesting things. I found out there were 2 Black newspapers, and there were Black journalists. And so that started my venture on discovering the Black communities of the Bay Area. So I stand on the shoulders of giants from throughout the Bay Area who began documenting the journey of the people of African ancestry. And these were, what we found out is that people during the 19th century built homes, communities, farms, businesses, and establish opportunities for so many others who came along to settle in this new place called California. So some of the people, what I discovered was that there were writers like Delilah Beasley. She wrote the Negro Trailblazers of California in 1918. There was Sue Bailey Thurman, who wrote about the pioneers of Negro origins in California in 1949. Then we also had the Garden Women's Club came along, and they wrote a book in 1978 that was a history of Black Americans in Santa Clara Valley. Then there was Harriet Arnold, who wrote a book, Antioch, a Place of Christians, in 1993. But even during this time, there were other writers. And there were many of them, these were the female writers, but there were men who were also writing about the miners and writing about the newspapers and writing a lot of really interesting stories about California and the California Black community. And that I found that just so enthralling that I wanted to research more and find out more about it. And this research led me to my books. So I found this great quote in the Garden Women's Club book titled The History of Black Americans in Santa Clara Valley. And the quote, and this is the quote, Black women have been the institutional anchor of the African American community. And that got me to thinking in preparation for today, that's very true. throughout the community and throughout our history, we will find Black women at the forefront. Here's Mary Pleasant in 1852. She was an abolitionist, a businesswoman, and she was designated as a mother of civil rights. You'll see on the left side a commemoration that right now is in San Francisco, a plaque that commemorates her for her work in terms of the abolitionist movement, but also not only that, but freeing those slaves who were brought to California as slaves and then were maintained in California. She also sued the Omnibus Rail Company, which was a horse car rail system, and she sued that company because they would not allow Black people to ride on the rail car at the same time white people were on the car. This was in 1868, and then on behalf of Black citizens, she sued the system, the omnibus rail system. And so she's designated as the Rosa Parks of San Francisco. Well, this happened in 1868. And after that, of course, the local transportation systems were available to all people. We had people like Sarah Massey, who came along, and she was attending the Colored School for Children. And that was a school right here in San Jose. This was in the 1860s, but later, once she graduated by the 1870s, she became at the forefront of desegregating the schools throughout the state of California. In the 1870s, San Jose schools were desegregated, and it was because of the hard work of Sarah Massey. There were many women that helped to establish. This photograph. This is a great photograph because this was after the 1870s when the schools were desegregated. And if you see on the far right, you'll see one Black child in the classroom. But this was the first time a Black child was able to go to school with white kids, and that was so. We can say that California was desegregated in the 1800s, long before many states in the Union in our country. But we also know that there were also women who helped to establish Black churches. The Third Baptist Church in San Francisco was established in 1852. It was a woman, Eliza Davis. She and her husband opened their home, and she was very instrumental in creating a place of worship where the Black community members could go. There were also women in the arts. And Mona Lewis, she was the first African-American sculptor to achieve international distinction. This was in 1873. Her work was purchased by Mrs. Knox, the Knox building downtown. And later, Mrs. Knox donated the sculpture pieces to the San Jose Public Library. You will find at Mona Lewis's pieces, she has 3 pieces, Lincoln's bust, Awake and Asleep, are on exhibit at the library today on the 5th floor in the California room. We also had Emma Grant. She was the first recorded African-American actress on the American stage in 1876 when she performed Uncle Tom's Cabin in San Francisco. Ivy Anderson, who from Gilroy, who was born in 1903, and she became a local hero when after high school she joined the Duke Ellington Band and toured Europe. So she went to Gilroy High School, and when I had a chance to research about her family, many people in the historians of the Historical Society said, you've got to include Ivy Anderson because she came back year after year after year, and she performed at the community college down in Gilroy, also at her high school too. So she was a person who was highly respected, and I understand she had a beautiful voice. And there was we also have women in politics. Iola Williams. We have Iola Williams, who was the first African-American woman elected to the local city council, to San Jose City Council. And in 1970, she served for 12 years, and she served 2 terms as vice mayor. Then we have women in justice. Judge LaDoris Cordell, she's a daughter of activists. She served as a judge at several courts from 1982 to 2000 in Santa Clara County. But in 1993, she served as a presiding judge of the Superior Appellate Department. In 2010, she became the independent police auditor. She also served on the Palo Alto City Council from 2004 to 2008. Then down in Monterey, it was Judge Marla Anderson. She served on the bench in Monterey County since 1995 and is still there today. Women have made their history, their mark in industry, starting with Mary Sutton, who was hired in 1969. And she worked as the first Black woman hired as a software and systems specialist. She was an engineer. She worked on the Polaris missile project. And many other African Americans, both men and women, were hired and were hired because human resource specialists went to historical Black colleges and recruited Black scientists to work on special federal projects. Many of them were considered top secret at the time, and to this day have not been able to talk about the work that they did on some of those projects. Local company personnel, human resources personnel often went out and recruited talented African-American talent. And many of these people were able to start working in the field of technology as early as the late 1960s and early 1970s. Women and African Americans were recruited from all over the country and relocated into San Jose, made San Jose their home. And many of these people are still here today. They raise their children here and are a part of our community. Francine Wright, the picture that you see on the screen, she joined Fairchild Semiconductor as a scientist in 1974. She then worked as an engineer and a scientist at IBM from 1978 to 1994. Today, she promotes the science, technology, and engineering and math programs known as STEM for girls. And she meets with youth groups to motivate youth and increase the awareness of STEM opportunities. She's truly a Shero. She travels all over the country sharing her experience as an engineer and as a scientist. And she's constantly there mentoring and recruiting young girls. We have women in education. The first Black woman to graduate from California Normal College was in 1906, which is now known, the Normal College is now San Jose State University, but it was located right on the San Jose State University campus before San Jose State College. Lucy Turner Johnson, she graduated in 1906. She was a San Jose family, went to North San Jose High School, and then went to the Normal College. There are so many women who opened doors for themselves, such as who opened doors of opportunities for themselves as others. Inez Jackson came to San Jose in 1944 looking for opportunities. She was an experienced teacher from Oklahoma, could not find work. So instead, she went ahead and found a job as a postal worker. But she continued to work towards recruiting more Black women to San Jose to work as educators. She eventually helped to establish the African American Community Service Agency, and she also established the Inez Jackson Historical Research Library. You have Dr. Charlie Knight in 1965, who lived down in Monterey County, and she worked tirelessly to help recruit Black teachers for the local schools. She traveled to the East Coast and to the South, and then recruiting Black educators. In 1970, Dr. Knight was hired as the first Black female associate superintendent of public education. Women, especially African-American women Sheroes, have often not received the opportunities and recognition so well deserved. This is especially true at the city and local levels. American history is a history of all people that make up this great country. I'm going to stop sharing here.
Wow, Jan, that was just this between Wendy and you, we truly feel the power of the women that we are now able to stand up fully tall because of the work that all of these women have done. And kudos to Wendy and you for, doing the research and then sharing all of it with us in such a gettable way. We have a question now for Wendy. Wendy, are you around?
Yes.
So the question is from the SJMA YouTube channel, and they are wondering, what are your thoughts on literary lesbians, Natalie Barney, etc.?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What are your thoughts on literary lesbians, Natalie Barney?
I'm not sure that I know who Natalie Barney is. My research is on the suffrage movement, which is women's fight to vote at the turn of the century. So I'm not sure I know enough about Natalie Barney to be able to answer the question.
Sure. So everybody, so now that we know fully well how much we owe the women who came before us, like what Robin was alluding to at the beginning of of the event, there comes a time when everybody's life where, that voice within you cannot be silenced. That voice within you will find a way out of you and reach out to the community. And so the next segment of our event is about those voices that will not be silenced, about one woman armies who are actually being the change and being the harbinger of change and actually effecting change. And but first, to talk about how her upbringing and how it has informed her artistic process and who she is today, and her expression, both artistically and personally, is Dorothy Atkins. Hey, Dorothy, could you come on video, please? Could you unmute yourself? There you are.
Well, thank you very much. And I have to actually thank Jan, because I did know about a lot of these women, and I also did not know about a lot of these women. So I appreciate that, Jan, and thank you very much for your talk. I want to tell you a little bit about me and how I got to be the artist that I am. I grew up in Vallejo, California, probably when Vallejo was part of the Wild Wild West, actually. And I was the only person in my neighborhood who looked like me. I grew up in a all-white neighborhood, so I learned the meaning of being the only one early on. But my story is, and has always been, that no matter your color, your race, your cultural background, there's also potential and possibility in all of us. So I started learning the ways of the world and how they tried to stop my progress very early. But I had a family that was so strong, such a loving family that gave me the courage to always know that I belonged. So I guess it's been a lifelong challenge of trying to tell my story, not the story that some would like for you to know about people of color, not that story that you would hear that was negative, because I knew all along that there was more to us than being just enslaved. And so I had a great deal of time to develop who I am and know that I belonged in this country and in this world, just like everybody else. And I love this country, even though it didn't always love me back. So I started drawing at a very early age, despite the fact that a junior high school teacher who saw my work and told me at a very early age that I had no talent. So I think that I draw just to stick it to her. And I started drawing women because I always saw the strength that women have and carry in their natural lives. Now, what really got me on this, trying to draw and use it as a healing tool and to bring the country together, is when I saw the story about George Floyd, as many of us saw, and I was overwhelmed and I was enraged. And I knew that I had to do something with these feelings that I had inside so that my heart did not turn to stone. And so I set out on this journey for myself. It was a very personal journey because, after all, I am a mother of brown children, brown brothers, brown husband, and they're all wonderful. And that just brought me to a place that I didn't know what to do with the anger and the rage. And so I started to paint. I painted every day for 3 years. And I painted and I called them my one love paintings. And I wanted to show women, all different kinds of women, because I knew that women held the strength to change the world. And I knew that women with the sisterhood and the mothers and the daughters and the wives, that we had so much strength that we could do that. So I started painting for myself every day for 3 solid years. I would paint a series of paintings called One Love. Very simple. I'm self-trained. I broke all the rules. I just painted what I felt like every single day. Like I said, I needed to protect my heart. Now, just to go back just a little bit about my all-white neighborhood, I found my community in the Black church. I learned discipline, leadership, strength, courage, pride, acceptance, kindness, and joy in that church. And that set the foundation for me to navigate through this world. Now, I still use art to connect other communities. I use it to make a change. I don't necessarily think that my art will change minds, but I think that it will change hearts. It's simply done, and just when the reader and the person looking at it will have a reaction to it, see that there are other people that are important in this world, that we make a difference, that we can make a change. I've included them in the way I paint. Very simply, like I said, I break all the rules when I paint, but I paint so that I can connect to other communities. I paint so that I can connect to other people. I use it as a healing tool, and it's always been with that in mind. And I personally started to just paint for myself, just to get through these days, just to get through the unrest, social unrest, just to get through COVID. I painted for those reasons. And then something just miraculously happened. I started to send my images out to friends, and they were moved by what they saw. I had no caption. I just called it One Love. Just one love is all I said. And they started to send it out to some of their friends. And then it caught on, and they sent it to someone else. And that simple message started to make its way around the globe. And people started to just look at it and have a feeling, just a feeling that we have so many commonalities, even though different, we have so many commonalities. We all want the same things in life. We want safety, love, education, security, safety for our families. We want all of those things. We might ask for it in a different way or explain it in a different way, but the art that I do is to show the commonalities that we all possess within us. And when you look at it, as I said, I don't have a title, only one love. And this is what came out of being, watching what was happening in society, being locked up for years with COVID. And I paint every single day. I paint something. And I will continue that. And I will also continue to tell my story, that we were more than just enslaved. And I want to change the narrative of how we look at each other and how we react with each other. Art can bridge a community. We can bridge generations. And it teaches us that there is more to life than just looking at someone and saying us and them. It's about all of us collectively. So I'm going to continue to use that art as a healing method, and I'm going to continue to write about it. I'm going to continue to talk about it, because and I don't want anyone else telling it but me. So I joined the National League of American Pen Women some years ago, which is an organization of professional writers and artists and musicians. And that organization was started because women were not allowed to be in the press club with the old boys. And so that organization is a place where we support women, we build them up, we support their careers, we talk about what they're doing. And it's just a place where I know that the reason why I continue to paint images of women is because women hold the power to make a change. They hold the power to make a change in the world, power to change, we interact. And I want to just say, I'm a member of the San Jose Women's Club, and they have allowed me to tell my story. And I appreciate that. And I'm also in a Japanese writing class, and I'm in a writing class with a pen woman, Louise Webb. And I'm, again, the only one in those organizations, not the pen women and not the women's club, but the writing clubs. I'm the only one. It's a very safe environment where we can talk about our cultures and share our stories and get to know each other and find out that those commonalities run very deep. And it's a place where we're not talking about us and them. We're just talking about how we can make a difference in the world and how we can change the narrative of what's going on with each other. And I think that that is just essential. So I will keep painting that way. I will keep painting very simply every day. And my message is just one love. And I think it's sort of caught on with a lot of people, and anyone that's seen my work find it recognizable. And as I said, it's crisscrossed across the globe. It's in Canada. They're seeing it in Europe. It's in New York. It's just going all over the place with that simple message of one love. And that's my intent, to keep on doing that and keep on telling my own story and not let anyone else tell it but me.
Dorothy, thank you so much for doing what you do and just saying what you did exactly how you said it, right? Because I think, especially as women, we're afflicted with, second guessing ourselves, partly because of the environment we've grown in, partly because of our DNA, I think.
Mhm.
And it's important to hear women like you actually say those things, that you did. So you're such an inspiration just for that. And I love what you said about one love, because Mosaic America, we are tired of people just saying, oh, wow, there's so much diversity around us, but then they hesitate to engage with that diversity, right? And for right reasons and for wrong reasons. And what we want to do is just, basically bell the cat, if you're familiar with the British expression, is basically say, come one, come all, and engage, and don't be afraid to ask questions and be curious, and you will be rewarded with one love, like Dorothy said. So Dorothy, thanks so much
Thank
for
you,
sharing
too.
that.
Thank you very much.
And so now, as we continue, like I said in the beginning, this segment focuses on women who have, like I said, they're one-woman armies, actually effecting change that they want to see in society. And now I have two videos for you, also from women of the San Jose Women's Club. The first one features the Reverend Kathleen Crowe, and I will just have you meet her on video. Let me just pull that up. And she couldn't be here because she is of Irish ancestry, and she had long-standing plans with her family to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And of course, we honored that. But I did want to get her work out to you. And so here we are. Let me share screen. First, let me get off video. And now share screen. There you go. I'm going to remember to hide these panels. And
when I retired, I felt truly a call from God. It's a hard thing to explain, a feeling of call. but I knew that it was a real thing and studied for ministry and was ordained in 2007 at Trinity Cathedral down on the corner of 2nd Street. And then through many iterations of my ministry, I found myself as chaplain at San Jose State, quite by default, never having thought I would do that. And it's become one of the richest experiences of my life. But my aha moment was serving on a crisis committee when I learned that at that time, 35,000 students matriculated. Nearly 4,000 were housing insecure. And I felt this almost outrage inside myself. How can we live in this rich valley and let young people who are striving to get an education live in their cars? How can we do it? And so that was the engine that drove me to start an intentional community in August of 2017. So I'm in the process now of working with the city of San Jose to get a special usage permit. I have a board of directors that gives me excellent support. And we hope to open again with housing for at least 8 students at no cost because of our wonderful donor base. In the interim, we have 4 host families that host students at no cost.
And how do students know about this program? Are there flyers around campus?
The partnerships I've built with the case managers at SJSU Cares and the Wellness Center on campus refer students to me. So the students come there first. They get the release to speak to me about it from the student. And then the student comes and I interview the student to see if I think it's a good match for our community.
You can build at scale and then you can reach more people. And basically it's multiplied. Your efforts are multiplied.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a ripple effect.
Right.
And so when students come to us, they often come with a lot of shame. That they don't have what they need. And the thing that I have found over time is to say, we are not giving you a handout.
Right.
This is not about handout. This is about investment. And they will say, well, what do you mean? I mean that we're not proselytizing you to the Episcopal Church. We honor you for who you are. I ask you only to give back to somebody else that is in need in your life. So I believe what we're doing is helping, yes, the tangible needs of an individual at the time, but we're also planting seeds that will ripple out beyond our awareness. Andy Warhol said we get 15 minutes of fame. I mean, I maybe get 5 minutes to talk today. But the important thing is not about me. It's building and raising awareness because often people don't realize it. And when I first started talking about student housing insecurity, people were shocked. That can't be true. There aren't students living in their cars. I said, oh, yes, there are. And so raising awareness has opened the hearts of many people, like having 4 host families now, of which one panel member is one. So people just don't know the problem. And once they do, then the outpouring has been incredible.
The wealthy in this area don't believe that they need to invest in this, right? All of the multi-million dollars may be going to, third world projects or, other hunger and, first need, so-called first need projects, right? So I was kind of going back to your point about awareness, right?
I think that's right. I think it is awareness. I think they think, well, there's no need here, but we have the poor in third world countries. What do you need here? Because they don't know that. And we have it right out our front door.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I don't think it's an either or.
No,
I think it's a both and.
Yeah.
I really do.
So if our listeners wanted to kind of sign up to be a host family or find at least more information, where could they go?
They can come and tell me, and I'll put their name down right away. And it's you have my information, chaplainkathy@gmail.com. And it's the Canterbury Foundation. We are a nonprofit under the aegis of our diocese, but we're our own nonprofit with the federal government.
You know, what I like about our conversation is, A, you're doing something about it. And
Trying really hard, yeah.
B, we can easily be a part of it, right?
Sure.
Anybody listening, all of
Mhm.
us, right? We just have to make mind space and heart space and space in our homes, as the case may be. But whatever, it's easy to kind of sign up and actually be part of the change that we want to be in society. I love it.
It's been just a wonderful call from God to do this work for students in my life. Never thought I would do it, but very blessed to be able to.
All right, that was the Reverend Kathleen Crowe, and I apologize. I just caught the typo on video. Her last name has an E at the end. And we have posted the email ID, chaplainkathy@gmail.com, in case you're interested to understand more of what the work that she's doing. But again, you know, what strikes me is Wendy and Jan took us through this entire gamut of women who did the tough work, on whose shoulders we stand today. And then there are this entire army of women who are continuing to be the change makers, right? And you know, very frequently I find that we are so filled with rage, and we don't have an outlet for that rage. And what Dorothy said, what Kathy is doing, and what she said is, you know, here is a beautiful way to create this society and give, you know, channelize all of our rage and anxiety into something creative and beautiful. And Mosaic America our mission is to engage with diversity, to catalyze inclusion, and to cultivate belonging. So we absolutely need each and every one of you to be that grassroots change, to be, you know, to follow us, to join us, to participate in our work and our partners' work. But I have two other Sheroes that I want to share with you guys. One is who Chaplain Crowe actually alluded to, Alex Gosek Gary. She is a host family, but she also does some other kind of work that I would love for you to kind of get to know. She is also on video, but then for this part of the segment, but we have her on audio, on video as well as in live for the Q&A session. So please hang tight. Please stay with us. Hi, Alice.
Hello.
You see yourself on video now.
Oh my.
I'm going to start it soon. So let me get off video. May I ask you also to get off video, and then I'll share screen. All right, here we are. Hi, Alice. Welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I applied for a job at San Jose City College, where I spent 26 years teaching ESL, and we became the largest program in the community college system in this area. My students were mainly refugees, and thus began my refugee experience.
I see.
And it has continued till this day. Some time ago, through a meeting at the Women's Club of the community, I became involved with Emmanuel House. And it's across from the Women's Club. And it's transitional housing for men refugees who were unaccompanied. I won't say unmarried because some of them do have families back in the country they came from. And that's been one of my activities. I joined the Women's Club after I retired and had time to do things like that. Mm-hmm. I've gotten myself into various activities there.
And so now going back to your work with the Afghan refugees, can you give us some idea of like some numbers, like how many years, how many refugees / families?
Well, pre-COVID, When I was solely associated with Emmanuel House, IRC, International Rescue Committee, was bringing in refugees. They were bringing in the single men that we were dealing with. And at some point, Emmanuel House, the board wanted to create an Emmanuel House 2, and they wanted to house at least a family. And so they leased a condo, and we had a family in there. And I was a kind of liaison. We have had our greatest success with individual landlords or landlords who have an immigrant background themselves and want to give back. Jewish Family Services does provide a deposit and 4 months rent. And people after that time can usually stand on their own 2 feet with their jobs.
And how do you also help the families and the single men, unaccompanied men with jobs, finding jobs, or?
It's quite easy for unaccompanied men to find jobs. It seems, at least we have a connection to someone who will provide them with security jobs. So people are getting jobs. You know, they're not lucrative jobs compared to the background. The latest influx of Afghan refugees we have are urban people who are highly educated. I've dealt with a number of people who are doctors, medical doctors, a dentist, someone who was an attorney as well. And those are just some of the people I've dealt with.
So if more people wanted to kind of help you out, what do they need to do? Do they just email you, or who do they get in touch with?
Email me and I could refer them.
And so people who want to help, they can help with jobs, they can help with homestays, they can help with just rooms or entire units available.
Yes.
For stays. How about
those
money?
would be wonderful helps.
And how about money?
Money is always needed by these organizations.
So
like
they would go then to
or a JFS through the highest organization.
Part of the reason I wanted to have this opportunity to talk to you, because there is so much that one person can do and accomplish, right? So what do you get out of it?
A feeling of satisfaction that I've helped somebody do something to improve their lives. Everything I have done has been part of a team. From the opera luncheon to the ladies who do lunch to the housing committee of JFS or the board of Emmanuel House. It's the good efforts of a lot of people that get things done. And if anyone wants to join in, they're welcome.
All right. And that was Alice. I want to now invite Christine to come on video. And so I am also a member of the San Jose Women's Club. So there's me, you saw Dorothy, there you saw the Reverend Kathleen Crowe, and then you saw Alice. And so Christine, you're literally changing the face of the San Jose Women's Club. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, thank you. I'm so moved by everyone's comments. I'm in another world. So I appreciate all these journeys I've been treated to. And Alice ended with, it takes a team. So while I have definitely been out in front off and on the last couple of years with the Women's Club, behind me is a very talented board, people pushing back, and a whole sort of organism of leaders that together we make the decisions. But specifically, we had an opportunity with the events of, well, first the pandemic and then the events of the summer of 2020, the uprisings, to use it as a pause, to pause and do the reflection we needed to do. And I think nonprofits need to do that generationally. So I just happened to be the president in this moment. And I saw that when we paused revenue earning activities due to the COVID shutdown, that allowed us in a way to think about how was our membership program moving forward, and how are we actively going out into the community with a ground game to declare that we are relevant, to declare that we are 127 years in the making and still agile, still building the future. And it's humble work. We didn't redo the website and do a big splash on social media. It's been a very quiet word of mouth campaign, and I'm delighted with, I think every single member is a Shero. It's just about finding a way to touch one another, to come together without expectation. And that's my specialty. That's where I get really jazzed up, when I get to meet people like Alice or Dorothy and Kathy, who are all friends. So yeah.
And so how is the membership today? Like, is it open? Are you open for anybody to join? What's it looking like? If you wanted, it would be great if you kind of give us a little bit of history on maybe where the members come from. Is it only San Jose? Just tell us a little bit about the history.
Well, the membership is principally local across the city of San Jose. We definitely have outliers. We've got members in LA, we've got members in DC, San Francisco, over the hill in Santa Cruz, et cetera. But principally, the heart and soul of the organization is hyper local. What's been neat about the last couple of years is that it's a hyper local organization with a global, I would say, a global perspective increasingly. But the last, in 2020, about 6 months into my term, we made a radical decision to shift our business model away from charging for membership, and instead opened membership to anyone who was interested in joining. And while that was a radical choice to do in a year when there was such limited revenue because of the rental business being shuttered, we were able to dramatically increase and diversify our membership step by step. And so the map that you're showing makes me so happy, because we are reaching new neighborhoods within San Jose that may have been underrepresented on our roster for years. And so our membership numbers at this point are roughly 510 or 15 members. And that's a several decades high. The membership of the Women's Club peaked in the 60s, I believe, and it was around 600 and had tapered and tapered. So to watch the trend, I think it started around 2018, 2019. 2020 and 21, we really became much more intentional about saying, we're welcome, we're inclusive, come check us out. And my hope is that the next leadership on the board gets to take that platform to the next level with conversations like this regularly, with more work by folks like Kathy and Alice. And with a landmark building in downtown, 5 blocks from City Hall, while it's very, very expensive for us to maintain it, it is a wonderful resource. And it was built for the future in 1929. It was not built for the past. So we've got to continue to imbue the work and the programming that goes on there with a future vision. And that takes a lot of audacity, agency, and somewhat ambition, and it can be controversial. People don't necessarily like change. And as someone who's pretty new to town, I can get, people can look at me suspect as well. And what the heck are you up to? You don't even know San Jose.
Right.
So I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I have a very personal reaction to all that you're saying, is because, I'm an immigrant. I came to the US. I've lived within 5 miles of San Jose all my life. Well, all my life here in the US since 1999. I've seen the change, the region change, right? And I'm sure it was shocking for people who've lived here for generations to kind of see the old Safeways and ranch markets and, fish and tackle shops kind of change, neighborhoods changing, right? So I feel like all of us are in this moment of, we don't know if we belong and how to belong, right, to this great country, and definitely to our place, right? However you define place. But in trying to get to know the country, this is early 2000s, I read up about the Women's Club, and what struck me was, yes, it has a checkered past. It is hotly debated. There was some, what should I say? Let's just leave it as there's some gray areas there. But overwhelmingly, what struck me was, Women's Club stood for the cumulative and collective power of women. Right. And when I discovered the San Jose, the first club I discovered was the Foothill Club in Saratoga. And that too has a beautiful building. And then I come to San Jose Women's Club, and you have a beautiful building too. And I said, oh my God, look at these, this is like the, the hallway of history, so to speak. Right. I just felt like I belonged to this instant network of Women's Club through the country. And I just felt, it's true that, there is some part of the Women's Club history that is not understood and, clearly needs to be corrected, right? However, the power of any club, like the power of Mosaic America, comes from our fierce team. And with you kind of opening the doors, not that they were closed, but opening the doors in a very deliberate and intentional manner, I think is the way to go, because you are now welcoming, people like more people who want to be the change, right? At this point, I would love to have everybody, all our panelists, and Gladys, you too, to come on video. So Robin, Dorothy, Wendy, Fred, if you want to, absolutely, Alice and Jan. But Christine, so what are your hopes for the membership? I'm assuming it, when you said inclusive, you meant multicultural, but how do you, what's just the plan?
Well, it's more of this. Quite honestly, I think Wendy made a point in her work, or at least I read it on her website earlier, this the temptation to sanitize history for whatever reason. I don't know if it's convenience, or maybe it relates to Robin's featured artist at the museum, where we need to resist the compression of our identities.
Yes.
As an organization that now represents 7 generations, so from 104 to 20-year-olds, we are increasingly diverse, increasingly young, and increasingly old. There's a great opportunity to bring back some conversations around youth-oriented patriarchy, what was really happening at the time when the club was founded. Women still need a space, a safe space or femme energy still needs a safe space to practice being in proximity. It's not always about good charitable works, right? It's not always about the auxiliary or, saving the world. A good inspiration, a good piece of it is, but there's something to be said about friendship across generations, and a place where we can practice coming together with no second step. Just a coffee, I'm going to see Alice in the hall. Maybe we don't get super connected and work together, but I admire her so much, and she's my sister. Kathy's my sister.
I definitely want to comment on your multi-generational. I was at the potluck a few weeks ago, and I totally felt like, oh my gosh, I felt the femme energy and I felt the multi-generational. I certainly felt cared for. But Jan, if I may put you on the spot a little bit, this whole, and Wendy, you too, because it is your quote that we are going to kind of, riff off of. This whole sanitization angle of women's histories, women's perspective, women's stories. Jan, what did you find in your research? I mean, and I know you kind of also alluded to the same thing.
Yes. Well, what I found is a lack of information. It's like, you know what, just sit quiet. And one of the things that I found was quite interesting, I mentioned one woman with regards to building churches. And so I actually went and I looked at some of the original documents that I had on the individual churches, those signers, they were all men. So that's really interesting. Now I want to go back and look at some other churches. So I did get a chance to look at two churches. The one in San Jose that was started in the 1850s and the one in San Francisco started in the 1850s. And both of them, I was able to find their actual, I think it was through History San Jose. It wasn't History San Jose, it was through the Sarasu Academy, where I was able to, I had copies of some of the original documents and I had scanned those and I had them on my computer. And and I know that the women were there, putting the seed in for the church, building the church, getting the support for the church. But on the church documents, they're signed by men. I thought, wait a minute, what the heck happened here? So yeah, and then the schools. Now we know that there were Black schools started. San Francisco, San Jose had 2. We're talking 1850s. Yeah. And there's not a mention. Now, Sarah Massey was mentioned in terms of her work to desegregate, but the stories that I've read talk about women, but in terms of the actual documentation, no, it's the men. So you know what? Once again, women are not identified, recognized, and given credit for the work that we've done. And this is especially common with women of the 19th century and early 20th century. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was just shocked. In Antioch Baptist Church, I had documents of the 2 people that helped who were 2 of a group of people. I'm saying, where were the women? So I haven't been able to just completely research for all of the churches, but you don't see the women on the actual documents. And so that tells me that the women, as usual, were in the background, but we know it was the women that really spearheaded the formation of those churches. Mm-hmm. We have another church in Palo Alto, and I'm curious. I want to look at those documents. So yeah, I think the conclusion I've come to is that women aren't recognized and didn't get the credit for some of the work that we did. But we know that women were the ones that were demanding to have schools and demanding churches and demanding, maybe women even had businesses. And when I read in the Black newspapers, some of the women ran boarding houses and things like that. Mm-hmm. But once again, the credit isn't given. So, I mean, it's nothing new. It's the same old story. We need to make sure that women receive the credit for our contributions and that we continue to contribute. Mm-hmm. We continue to contribute, and we don't have to hide behind the husband or the man. We need to stand up and speak up for what we believe.
Yeah, we don't have to wait for permission.
That's right. Permission. That's the word. Yes.
I would love for you, Jan, to talk a little bit about the manumissions.
The manumission papers.
Yes.
Yes. So everyone, we've been taught in California history that California was a free state. Doesn't matter where you took your history courses. California was a free state. Slaves were not allowed in California. Well, that's not true. There were slaves in California. And what happened is that many of the slave owners, plantation owners, were allowed to bring their slaves into California. But I read another document about, it was a newspaper document about San Jose. And it wasn't just Black people who were bought. They bought and sold people. Asian people were bought and sold. Yes. Native Americans were bought and sold. I just can't believe who would want to buy people. Children were bought and sold.
Right. That's right.
Black people were bought and sold. And so this, I think I'm really getting fired up about this. I wanted to, the whole fact of the buying and selling of people. What kind of people do that?
That's right.
I'd like to bring that to the present, which is trafficking. I mean, human trafficking in our city is a major deal. And so I love the historical perspective, and we have got to show up for today too with it, because it's a big issue. I'd love to learn. I'm going to make a request through Mosaic, come to the women's club and let's do a trafficking conversation. I'm sure the talent is amazing out there.
It's so true. I have often gotten myself into trouble by saying that slavery didn't end, it evolved.
Sad. It's so sad. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And, Sarah Massey's husband, Jacob Overton, actually came to California as a child slave.
He was a slave.
He was a slave. He was 9 years old.
The Overtons.
And of course
Overton.
Dr. Overton died and they freed him. But he and Sarah lived with Sarah Knox Goodrich all their lives. All of them lived in that house together. Which is another really interesting thing.
Yeah. There's an interesting paper by Jean Libby about the families.
Mm-hmm. And, the history of us is complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's complicated, and trying to sanitize it or clean it up or ignore it or bury it has only gotten us in trouble. Some very famous person, I can't think who it was, once said that every archive writes the future. Right. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that, but I also think people for the first time are willing to hear those honest, authentic, truthful histories. People are sick of hearing the clean version. They want to hear the real version, and it is complicated. Like the women's club, their history is complicated. Mm-hmm. It's not all bad and it's not all good. It's complicated.
We keep referencing it for people who don't know some of the challenging points. And then I really think I would have to say, Robin, Dorothy's approach to her personal history and her story has this whimsy to it. And it was so provocative to listen to you tell that story and see your art. I definitely want you to, I hope you'll jump in, but I do want to say, because we've referenced it several times, the Women's Club is controversial for several reasons, but I'm going to name three. One is the conversation around the right to vote and suffrage. Wendy's the expert. I don't dare speak on suffrage. I'm not a historian, but white women did not advocate for women of color for their right to vote while we marched for ours. And that's a really low level interpretation. Second is in California, the story around the mission bells being a representation of misery and a trail of tears, rather than women's clubs across the state of California restored the bells as important historical relics. And so what we've seen, I think most recently, Santa Cruz took down their mission bell, and those conversations are happening across communities. And I said there were three. I know there's one more.
Did you want to talk about the sempervirens environment? Oh, controversy. Never mind.
Yeah, no, sempervirens is a wonderful thing. But anyway, those are two that I'm aware of with the San Jose Women's Club. And each of those, I would imagine, need to be addressed with language on some level going forward. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that in my term, but I hope that we can do that work so that we are looking at history with today's eyes. And there's a lot of talent in the club, and now people out here in the community that I'm meeting today that can help support that. So
yeah, and as chief programming officer for Mosaic America, right, I feel like it's my mission and my calling really to provide safe places so that these conversations can happen. Because there's so much fear, hesitancy. I don't know if I'll be included. There's outright exclusion. There's so much of that happening, real, imagined, projected, many different ways, that, I just really feel like our mission is to provide safe places. I do want to talk a little bit about the actual and metaphorical redlining, right? Because I feel like, Christine, to your point, and Robin, to your point, archives are the route to the future, or reflection of the future. So Jan, there was redlining of a certain kind that you brought out through your research. Wendy, if I may kind of put it metaphorically, there was redlining of identities, right? When you talk about, how queer women had to kind of suppress their identity so that they could kind of move the needle a bit, right? And so there's like redlining of different kinds. You just want to comment a little bit about that, Wendy and Jan?
Yeah, I love hearing what everyone's saying here. It's so important. I think the key thing is to call out what we see, right? If there is racism, homophobia, transphobia, even sexism in the past, we need to talk about it. We need to name it and say what it is, and talk about that history, talk about where we are now, and talk about where we're going in the future. And so, with the suffrage movement, there was blatant attempts to marginalize queer women in the movement, to marginalize people whose gender identities didn't fit with the status quo. So Dr. Mary Edwards Walker is on the cover of that book. And Dr. Walker believed in dress reform. And so she wore pants and what was considered men's clothing at the time. And she was considered to be extreme by the suffragists because they were trying to focus on the vote. And they felt like all the media attention would go to her. And they said, it makes us look bad. She's too masculine and mannish. And, it really detracts from the respectable, feminine, middle class, heteronormative image that we want to portray. So essentially, they marginalize her and push her to the extremes. And what that does then is marginalize queer women in the movement in general. And then women who, if they were alive today, might identify as lesbian also existed in the movement. And sometimes it was they themselves who are hiding their own relationships because of their own internalized homophobia or fear that they would be treated differently in the movement. So sometimes they literally burned their letters later on in their lives. So, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about the complex reasons for this homophobia and this transphobia. And then we need to talk about, like you said, where are we going today in the current women's rights movement, in our clubs and our women's clubs today? And how do we define women? And how do we define our goals moving forward? And whose women's rights are we fighting for?
You make a good point about that, Wendy. And I just want to talk about, it's time for us to have those uncomfortable conversations and to talk about race and to talk about anything else that's different than ourselves. It's always very uncomfortable, but it has to come to a place where we have to stand up and talk about that. I can remember, and I'm doing personal history, like when they started the women's movement, it never included me. There never was a door for a Black woman. So white women have had that, not all, but when they were starting about their rights, they were not including anybody that looked like me ever. And so we've moved over, and through that, they've missed the point of saying that they weren't doing that at that time. They need to acknowledge that it was not always open to women of color. And I think once they say that, once we talk about it and acknowledge it, we can move forward as a group of women, because we're fighting for the same thing, the same rights. But we have to acknowledge that we were not all, the door wasn't always open. And I don't want to languish in the past, but it is something that you have to acknowledge before you can go forward in the future.
I agree with you, Dorothy, and I will tell you, it's been the most challenging piece of work of my life as a white woman, privileged, running the women's club, being a volunteer president, and doing that change, like trying to stand at it so that it gets easier for the next. So anyone who's out there listening and wants to support the work, there are women's clubs all over this country that are ready for these conversations, but it takes a particular ability to stand in two worlds and language it. And it can be gruesome off and on, some of the projections that come through, but that's just the stage we're at. And if we don't do the work, those women's clubs won't become re-relevanced, if you will, right? So I see it as an opportunity to re-relevance the movement. Like your favorite jeans are in style again. No, I mean, like you can recycle and adaptive reuse the buildings and the ideas, the philosophies, and go deeper and get more invested in local issues again.
Speaking of local issues, Alice, when you and I started talking the other day, you had just gotten off a call wherein you got rejected again.
Yes.
Right. You want to talk a little bit about what is it that, like just the psychology of rejection, right? Especially for the kind of work that you do. You would think, so just what has been your experience and how do we get around it?
The incident or the incidences are approaching landlords to find housing for refugees. Mm-hmm. And newcomers may have social security numbers. They've been in a refugee camp, but they have no credit history and sometimes no jobs, even though they have impressive background from their own country. And landlords want 2.5 to 5 times the rent is a person's salary in order to rent to them. So many of the calls I make go nowhere. Mm. And I'm just sort of facing rejection. But I keep soldiering on. I mean, it's not the first rejection I've faced in my life. And I guess a good family background where you feel secure and loved, as Dorothy said, keeps you going.
Thank you, Alice. We have a question from from Rita in the audience. And it's about, she says, and I guess this is to Jan, I would like to see and have requested organizations to show redlining maps of the regions. Do you happen to have a redlining map ready, Jan? Like how it used to be?
No, I cannot. I don't have a redlining map, but those are available in financial institutions who redlined.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be, I think, the financial institutions. And
the insurance industry.
Yeah, also. The insurance. That's another good one. Exactly. So that's where that can be started if you want. I wanted to mention something on slavery and manumissions. You asked me the question mm-hmm. about manumissions. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there was an article when San Jose was young, and there was an article about slavery in San Jose, and there were people like the Reed family. The Reed Street's named after the Reed family. We have the Bascom's. So there were people who owned slaves in San Jose, and yet the streets are named after them. I mean, is the Women's Club interested in trying to rename some of those streets that were named after slave owners?
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
I am one person, one member of the Women's Club. That's all. And I will delight in saying that is exactly the type of inquiry I love, and bring it to the Women's Club and see who shows up. Alice is on the line. Dorothy's on the line. And, I see a lot of differences between our Women's Club members. So I don't, I couldn't tell you what would be successful there.
I think we need to engage other organizations as well.
Exactly.
It simply isn't one organization, but a phalanx of them that would move that issue.
We have a lot of space and would be very happy to host a meeting with community leaders and to see where the conversation goes. Jan, if you want to convene something like that.
Okay.
I have one more question or comment from the audience, and it's kind of like an open, question to all. I see this is Sandra, and she says, I see the media still today not giving women the same coverage as men, especially in sports. Can anyone talk about the role of the media in continuing to limit women's recognition and exposure? Anybody would like to comment? We're actually at time, but I'll take any comments from anybody. For me, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and the thing that shocked me the most about women in sports and the portrayal and everything is that the uniforms or the costumes that women wear for certain sports, the length of it was decided by whether or not men were going to watch that sport. And therefore, apparently, all of the lengths of the skirts and the shorts and leotards were designed as eye candy. Now, I mean, that to me was a revelation, and you guys grew up here. Did you actually see that happen?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and the continued objectification and sexualization of women. And Sandra, especially talking about the lack of media coverage being lack of fair representation. And we continue to see that in movies and television, just the objectification still. But I think the key thing to remember is that when you see these issues, right, that's the continued issues that we need to be fighting for. Women's rights are far from over, right? We're still fighting for those things. So when you see these things, those are things we can do something about. And so thinking about how we're going to make that change in our world.
This is a great comment, because the founding of the Women's Club was based on preserving the redwoods, clean air, clean water, education, kindergarten for all. And those are still really important. The issues of disparities facing us in municipal communities persist. Mm-hmm. So I can't remember the historical figure you named who fought for the dress code to change for women. But Priya's point about Sandra's point about the sports uniforms is similar to that. It's sort of intersectional.
Yes.
And wasn't a woman just in the Winter Olympics just a few weeks ago? Wasn't she disqualified based on the fact that her uniform, or whatever you call it, Priya called it a costume, which is probably more accurate. Violated some standard? Wasn't she disqualified based on that?
Huh.
I believe so.
Yeah, I think so. It just happened like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
She was.
I wish we could pull that up. I'm remembering someone wearing a traditional cloth that was woven over their uniform in the procession, but I don't remember the other.
Oh, she was disqualified.
It was in the game itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember what game it was, but I just remember hearing that and thinking, it just does sometimes feel endless.
All right.
Wendy's right. We have to just keep at it. But yeah, it's sometimes discouraging.
But this is femme energy right here, right? And this is what we are about, and we don't give up. We just keep going on. And I hope that, all of our audience kind of joins with all of our organizations, San Jose Museum of Art. Thank you again for having us, Mosaic America and San Jose Women's Club, the Penn Women, Wendy Rouse's campus, Jan's campus, Alice's efforts, all of us, right? Let's hope that we get a fillip out of this event for all of our causes. And on that note, I'd like to conclude this event. Thank you.
I just want to add,
go ahead.
I want to add two things real quick, Priya.
Absolutely.
I just want to add,
absolutely. Yes.
add my thanks as well. And also, I just want to, just on a personal note, I just want to say something. So Dorothy called me this afternoon because her friends were trying to figure out how to get to view the program tonight, because they said they wanted to see her. They were so impressed she was going to do this. They thought she was a rock star. So who thinks she's a rock star? I do.
Oh, that's funny.
Your friends were right, Dorothy. You are awesome. You are a rock star. And I hope they all got to see it.
I think they tuned in. They were so excited about getting it here. So
I think that's great. I think that's great. And we will consider this a success and a job well done based on that alone.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you again, Priya, for everything. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Like I said, the San Jose Museum of Art is very committed to hosting programs like this. So
Thank you for inviting me to
Thank you.
participate and meet all of you. It's wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, audience.
Yes.
Yes.
And please come back next time.
And thank you, my friends.
Thank you to Dorothy's friends.
Dorothy's friend. She has a crew.
All right, everybody. Group hug.
Bye.
Till the next time.
Yes.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, Marcia, thank you. All right, I'm just gonna make sure that I've not missed any question. Gladys, let's include Alice's comment. Oh, you don't see it, but she has given some more tips on how people can reach the various committees at the Women's Club. Okay, I guess we're still live streaming.
Yeah.
So let's technically conclude this by saying,